So today I'm trying a departure from my usual video format in which I'm going to do a bit of a live talk through as I look through this book, and you can let me know in the comments below whether you like this format or not. And the reason that I've chosen this particular book to experiment with is that this is an ex-library copy, so you can see that it has many of the usual blemishes that go hand in hand with that, but I think it's going to be an interesting book to look at all the same. The book is called Lakeland Diary. It's by Enid Wilson and it was published by the Fleece Press in 1985. Enid Wilson was a columnist for the Guardian newspaper, and she lived in the Lake District in the northwest of England, and she wrote regular columns for the newspaper about rural life in that part of the country over the course of the second half of the 20th century. And so those columns in aggregate give a bit of a picture of what it was like to live in that part of the world at a particular point in time, and a number of their entries have been compiled together here, almost like diary entries in this particular volume. You can see that it was illustrated with wood engravings by Kathleen Lindsay and Edward Stamp. This particular one that you see here is by Edward Stamp, and there are 20 engravings in total. We'll see some of those in just a moment. But I'm getting a bit ahead of myself, so let's go back to the front. The book is quarter bound in russet cloth, and it has this nice marbled paper which has this real autumnal flavour with the oranges and the muted greens. I really like the marbling, and I think it does a good job of evoking this sense of a sort of natural world at the arrival of autumn. So I'm quite a fan of the exterior design of the book. As I said, it was published by the Fleece Press in 1985. The Fleece Press, of course, is operated by Simon Lawrence, who has a few paragraphs of introductory comments here. One interesting thing about this book is that although it was published by the Fleece Press, we can see here that it was actually printed by the Whittington Press, and many aspects of the book's productions hint at that genesis in Whittington, if you're at all familiar with their books. In fact, the marbling that I said I like so much is known as Whittington marbled paper, and I believe it was used also on an issue of Whittington's Matrix serial. So printed and produced by the Whittington Press. Like many of the Whittington Press's books, the paper here is zircon mold made paper. You probably can't see it on camera, but a number of the leaves have a watermark in the bottom corner that has the zircon logo on it to indicate its origin, and it has these rough untrimmed edges on the bottom and foredge. And it's a pretty simple volume, so we have this introduction here of sorts by Simon Lawrence. Then we have a list of the 20 engravings by the two engravers, and then we're right into the entries. So this is typical of the entries that we find in the book. We have some text which describes, gives a little bit of a vignette almost of an occasion, an experience, a moment of life in this rural Lakeland landscape, and often they're accompanied by these relatively small engravings that illustrate a moment that was described in the entry. One interesting thing about these entries is that they're not always presented in chronological order. So you can see here we have 63, 75, 75, and then back to 53 again. And sometimes there's a sense of a bit of a thematic grouping of entries that talk about similar topics together, but mostly it feels a little bit like a random scattering of accounts of countryside life. So this leaf here is a little bit interesting. So as I said, it's an ex-library book. You can see that it's been through the wars a bit. In fact, this leaf had come detached entirely. And I asked in the library thing fine press forum for some tips about reattaching it, and somebody suggested using this book repair tape, and that's exactly what I did, and I would love to offer that as a pro tip for anyone else who's looking to attach a leaf. So I don't know if you can really see it on camera, but running along here we have this matte transparent book repair tissue tape. It's archival and acid free, so it's not going to damage the book in the future. It's almost invisible, so you have to know it's there really to spot it, or go looking for it at least. And it feels very firm and has secured the page very naturally in place. So of course, if you have severe damage like a page coming out, you're never going to get a perfect fit unless you go to a proper conservationist. But if you have a book like this that's not very valuable and you want a quick home fix, this book repair tape is really superb stuff. And yes, so we can also see here a few samples of the engravings. The two authors, the two engravers definitely have their own style, but they're not so dissimilar that they sit awkwardly together, and I think the whole design of the book gels together very nicely. The paper, if you know Zircon paper, is very nice. It's a pretty heavy variant of the paper, has this off-white colour and a slightly rough texture. I have the problem that I have so many books now with this Zircon paper that I almost take it for granted, but it's a real nice paper to handle. It has a good rag content, so the paper feels a bit more pliable than something that's made purely with wood pulp. This is an example of one of the larger engravings in the book. And as I said, it's altogether a pretty simple volume that just has this sequence of diary entries. If you're interested in the natural world or in rural life, they make for some fun reading. And then at the end we have a colour font page that identifies this as one of a limited number. So there were 325 produced in total. 300 of them are the standard edition, which you see here, and an additional 25 look very similar, but they were bound with Oasis goatskin leather instead of this russet buckram that we saw on the cover. That's about all there is to it. It's a nicely produced book. You know, if you know the Fleece Press or you know the Whittington Press, you know that you're only going to get a pretty nice volume from them. This book is no exception. And yes, if you're interested in country life, an interesting read. Has this title there on the spine in gilt. So that's about all there is to say to that, and I hope you enjoyed the video.